The Swedish Empire was one of the most militarily successful forces in history. Throughout the 16th and 17th centuries, before their eventual collapse in the early 17th, they consistently faced numerically superior forces, often up to double, 3, or even 4 times their own size. But how did this empire, with a comparatively tiny population, face armies all across Europe and win? Our answer, at least somewhat, lies in "gapa," literally meaning go on. This was one of the most overtly aggressive and organised tactical doctrines that Europe up to this point had ever seen. And in the words of one general, "Never have I ever seen such a combination of uncontrollable dash and perfectly controlled discipline. Such soldiers and such subjects are not to be found the wide world over, except in Sweden." Here, the Swedish concocted an almost perfect storm of variables that made their army a force that could punch far above its weight. Regiments were organised by locality, necessary in the linguistically and culturally diverse Swedish Empire. They too were encouraged by an extreme Protestant fanaticism that tied the army together, and arguably helped tie together a force that consistently suffered incredibly high casualties. But how did "gapa" actually work? Firstly, the Swedish made use of tactics that for most of Europe were either incredibly outdated, such as the use of pikes, which they used instead of anti-cavalry defensive weapons, as shock weapons where the long range was an advantage in their charges, and conversely ahead of their time, such as disallowing the use of pistols during cavalry charges, something that had crippled the effectiveness of the cavalry charge all across Europe. Their troops, of which in some engagements over half would be cavalry, were equipped with a mix of muskets, pikes, and rapiers. Rapiers being particularly effective in the case of the cavalry, being stabbing instead of slashing weapons, assisting the charge mentality. The Swedish would organise into 4 ranks. They would then start to march, starting at 100 metres, which is the effective range of muskets, and fire at around 50. Then the back 2 ranks would fill into the gaps of the front 2 and fire their muskets, and then draw their swords. They would then pull back and the front 2 ranks would close up. Then, taking advantage of the shattering close-range volley they had just fired, would charge. If the enemy did not flee, they would be massacred by a devastating melee. In later years, this tactic became even more extreme, with the Carolean army often actually running up to as close as 15 metres from the enemy before firing. The phrase, "do not fire until you see the whites of their eyes," often attributed to the Americans at Bunker Hill or Frederick of Prussia, has also been attributed to the Swedes, and honestly, it fits them better.